All right, my name is Sarah Fangman, and I am the superintendent of the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, and I want to thank you all for being here. I am very, very excited to finally have reached this day. Many of us have been working very hard for close to a year on this effort, on this initiative, on this idea, and many in the room have been working for even harder and longer on these types of issues. So it is a big day for all of us today. So I'm looking forward to telling you about our project to restore 7 iconic reefs here in the Florida Keys. This is a mission to recover some iconic reef systems here. But before I get started with my remarks, I just want to show a quick video.
Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary protects one of the world's exceptional barrier reefs. The coral reefs provide crucial habitat for fish, sea turtles, and more. The Keys are also a renowned destination for diving, snorkeling, and fishing. But the coral reefs of the Florida Keys need our help. Hurricanes, warming temperatures, disease, poor water quality, and heavy use have led to catastrophic decline. While some problems are global, bold local action can change the trajectory of coral reef health and protect the economy that depends on them. NOAA and its partners are launching an unprecedented restoration effort to recover 7 iconic coral reefs in the Florida Keys. Mission Iconic Reefs represents one of the largest investments ever undertaken in coral restoration. This ambitious plan embraces innovative techniques to rebuild coral reef structure, restore ecosystem function, and promote resiliency. Working together with world-renowned scientists, restoration partners, government agencies, and passionate individuals, we can put Florida's coral reefs on track for recovery. Join the mission to protect and restore these iconic reefs.
Okay, so for me today is all about hope. It's all about hope, and I hope that when you leave, you will be feeling that same sense of hope after you hear more about this proposal. So we all are aware that the reefs here in the Florida Keys were at one time really some of the most iconic in the world. And here in the Keys, our lives are intimately connected with these reef resources. We recreate there. Our way of life is really tied to these reefs. Our economy is tied, tied to our ocean and the resources on these reefs. Beyond that, these reefs also provide important ecological services to all of us. They provide habitat for fisheries and for other organisms. And importantly, they provide protection from the storms that continue to advance against our shores. As noted in the video, we always hear about threats that are occurring on these reefs, and the threats and the stressors are significant. We've seen bleaching events, temperature stress, storm events overturning, centuries-old corals, and of course, right now, the stony coral tissue loss disease event, among other challenges. And frankly, we cannot afford to let these declines continue. We cannot afford not to act. We must take action to reverse course. These systems are in a state that without our active help, they cannot recover fast enough. That is why it is time for bold strategies. Now, recognizing that those actions will still be taking place while we have considerable challenges and stressors. Temperature stress, storm events, those things are not going away. But we cannot wait for them to go away in order to act. And so we need to take these restoration steps and execute this strategy in the context of those threats, using resilient and resistant corals, making sure we're propagating and outplanting corals that are genetically diverse and able to withstand the stressors that will continue. We can't afford to wait. And that's because natural recovery of these systems cannot happen fast enough for this situation. Given the challenges that we're facing, natural recovery is not the answer. We need to get out and act ambitiously, because these corals, there's just not enough natural seed stock, and the habitats have declined such that it's really not conducive to recovery in a manner that we need. Fortunately for us, restoration is something that has been done for a long time here in the Keys. Many of these techniques that we are going to depend upon moving forward have been pioneered here, and we have learned a tremendous amount. Things that we are doing here have been exported around the world, and people are executing these same strategies elsewhere and are learning things, tweaking things. We want to bring some of those lessons back into the Florida Keys and benefit from what others have learned along the way. And I want to acknowledge that in this room are people who have done that pioneering work. And so we are very, very grateful. We are standing on the shoulders of the people who have been doing this with dedication and passion and commitment for many, many years. That commitment, that passion so far has been heroic, but it is still not keeping up with the decline, despite the best efforts of exceptional professionals who have been dedicated to this for years. We are still behind the curve, and that is why we have to take it to the next level. And people in this community recognize that. People in this community have been speaking to us, and I'm sure many of you, about what are we going to do? How can we get ahead of this? Community leaders, elected officials, and many of you have heard me talk about what really hits my heart is hearing from young women divers who just started their diving career, and in a few short years have borne witness to the declines on our reefs here in the Florida Keys. And if there is no reason other than that, we must act so that when they are my age, they are bearing witness to the turnaround of these reefs. They are telling the story of how these reefs rebounded with all of our collective efforts. That is what today is about. So clearly it is time to develop a bold and ambitious and comprehensive strategy for restoration, to reverse course on the reefs in the Florida Keys. And when we started thinking about this and went to these wonderful partners that you see on the slide here and said, this is what we're starting to try to think about. Will you help us? Will you be a part of this? And I was thrilled that every one of these organizations jumped up and jumped in to help be a part of this, recognizing that these are organizations that have a lot going on, very busy, lots of commitments, lots of things that they're trying to do. This was an ambitious thing that they found time for. And so that to me speaks volumes to the need, and it speaks volumes to this community and the ability to get together, to stand together and say, we got a problem. We need to all come together, do more as a sum of our, than we can do more as a sum of our collective efforts than, that was hard to get out, than we can do individually. I think you understand what I'm trying to say. So we identified 7 locations in the Florida Keys. This is not every reef in the Florida Keys, but it is a start. We identified reefs throughout the Keys so that we could make sure we are covering the broad geography. We picked spots that had historically were really iconic, important places here. We picked places that we felt had a very strong chance of success in restoration. And so these are the 7 places where we are going to start this effort. And I am going to invite my colleague Tom Moore to come up and tell you a little bit more about what we propose to do in these 7 places. Tom?
Thanks, Sarah. So it's super exciting to be here with all of you to talk about how we're going to start to turn these reef systems around. As Sarah talked about in the beginning here, the Florida Keys reefs were once some of the most iconic in the world, and unfortunately, over the last few years have become the poster childs of decline. And so we're looking to turn those reefs around. And the way we want to do that here is we want to expand upon the great work that's been being done down here for the last 15 years. As Sarah said, we have not been able to keep up with the decline, but we've learned a lot in that process, and we've learned what works, and we've learned what doesn't work, and we've learned the ways to tweak that. And so as we approached this effort and we identified these 7 sites, we started to say, how do we take a different approach to restoration? How do we think about this a little bit differently? So most of the work we've done to date is focused on step number 2 here, coral propagation and planting, the actual growing and putting of corals back out on the reefs. But as we thought about this effort, we wanted to take lessons learned from terrestrial ecology and just general construction practices. How do you think about rebuilding something when you've lost it? And so the first thing you think about doing is site preparation. You want to make sure these places are ready to go. When you plant your garden, you don't just go ahead and drop the seeds right in to the dry ground. You sow that ground, you make sure it's ready to go. We need to do the same things on these reef sites. Make sure the sites are comprehensively ready for restoration before we do that restoration. Then take a very aggressive and bold approach to restoration at these sites, working with resilient corals, working with corals that we think are going to be able to withstand the stressors that are coming in the future. But not just stop there. These systems historically had a nice balance between algae and corals on the reef, and all the different components work together. As the system has become more and more out of sync with each other, we haven't had that balance. And so we need to balance these sites out with grazers, adding urchins back into the reef to keep that algae situation under control. And then something new that we want to take an approach here is, just like with your garden or with any particular project, once you plant it and you begin to harvest from it, you don't just walk away from it. You take care of it as it grows. As weeds pop up, you get rid of those weeds. We're going to make big investments in a number of these sites, and it's going to be important for us to work at those sites and think about how we take care of them along the way. Have rangers and community participants that are at these sites on a regular basis, that are removing broken corals, getting rid of the weeds when they pop up at these sites, removing diseased corals, letting these sites flourish. And then, of course, with all of these types of activities, we need to be prepared for the inevitable. We know bad things are going to happen. Hurricanes aren't going to go away, but we do know that if we rebuild these sites strongly, that they can be in a better position to withstand these events and handle these events. But we still need to have monitoring. We still need to have tools for adaptive management. We need to make sure that we're putting aside resources to be able to go back to these sites to fix them as they go. But the first thing we had to do in this effort was we had to figure out what we were going to do with these sites. Identifying the 7 sites was what I thought initially was going to be the hardest part of this effort. But what really came down to was actually saying, how do we do this? It's not just a matter of simply saying you're going to restore these sites. If you want to put a realistic estimate out there of what it's going to take to do this particular work, that we need to actually think about it in a more comprehensive way. And so one of the first things we had to do was take a deep dive into mapping these particular sites, understanding the different habitats that were there. A reef is not a reef. A reef is comprised of lots of different habitats and different species and different components. And so the first thing we had to do was think about it that way. Second was, after we went into these sites, we had to set goals that made sense for different components of different portions of the site. One portion of a site doesn't necessarily deserve the same corals from a restoration standpoint as another portion of the site. So we had to zonate all of these sites, and so we had a team of partners, as Sarah mentioned earlier, that came together and put a ton of work into visiting each one of these sites, going out there, spending a robust amount of time in the field, working back in the office after that to then say, this makes sense for this component of this reef, this makes sense for this component of this reef, to ultimately drive a restoration requirement. And along the way here, we realized very quickly that we've lost a system over the course of 50 years. We're not going to get that system back overnight, right? So we need to lay out a plan and a strategy that thinks about how we're going to do this over time. At these 7 sites today, now this is just these 7 sites, we are probably close to 2% live coral cover. These sites historically had coral cover in excess of 25%. These sites, as Sarah mentioned earlier, are not going to come back on their own from being at 2% to trying to get back to 25%. So we need to take a more aggressive strategy to get there, but we can't get there overnight. So we've outlined kind of a 3-phased approach here. The first phase is going to focus very heavily on our corals that grow very fast, the elkhorn corals, the staghorn corals, the corals that you've seen a lot of the pictures of and you see hanging around the room here that can quickly come back to these sites and really begin to put some habitat back on these sites, put some structural complexity back there. We're going to quickly start to balance that out with some of our slower growing species, some of the species we have less experience with. And over the course of 10 years, really feel like we could, if we put the effort in, can be back to 15% coral cover. That's in just 10 years. We haven't been at 15% coral cover in the Keys for a lot longer than 10 years here. And so we can get back to that with this aggressive approach here, but that's not far enough, right? We need to then think about the long game here. We need to get these sites back to the point that they are going to be resilient on their own, that a storm can come and hit and it won't be a problem. And so to get there, we need to get back to that historic level of 25% cover, and that is a goal that we've set ourselves for 20 years. So I'm not going to expect everybody to read every number on this slide, but there's lots of components to this work that went into it to get to these numbers, from cost estimation to field verification and everything along the way. Ultimately, we realized that in the course of phase 1, we're going to need a little over 230,000 corals at these sites. And then a phase 2 that, as I said, runs out to year 20, about another 260,000 corals. Now, one of the big questions that everybody asks themselves is, well, how much is this going to cost? Right? That's always the question people want to know. And so before I show you that number, I want to caveat that we don't expect that this effort is going to be paid for through one generous donor, though we would love that. This is going to be an effort that involves a public-private partnership that brings together existing resources, leverages in those existing resources with new resources that are both from the public sector and the private sector. Our individual partners are going to be going out and raising money for this, while we work collectively as a group to raise money as well. The funding for this effort is not secured, but we knew that unless we put together a strategy and started to provide an answer, and that the answer wasn't just we need to do a lot, the answer was this is what we need, we could do that. And so we did put together a budget estimate here, but I will caveat that I know that estimate is wrong. Right? And the reason I know that estimate is wrong is because we are going to do this. There's going to be lots of partners that come together and do this in lots of different ways. We're going to learn a lot of things along the way, but we needed to ground that in something, and we needed to provide some sense as to if we did have all that money in one particular place, how much would that cost? And the reality is that's a big number, but it's not a huge number in the big scheme of things. So we're looking at for phase 1, about $97 million. That cuts across these various different components here of this particular effort. The vast majority of that is in the actual coral restoration components itself. But overall, it is a big investment, but in the big scheme of the economic drivers that this system has, it's not that big of an investment. It's something that's tangible and achievable when we come together to work on this. And so how are we actually going to do this? So we mentioned earlier, lots of individual partners, and every individual partner here plugs into this in a different way, right? We are certainly at NOAA and within the state going to work together to try to keep this effort organized and moving forward. But the real work is going to come from the individual organizations that are represented here in this room that are going to be on the ground and on the water day in and day out executing this effort. It's going to be a combination of work that takes place in our ocean-based nurseries, many of which there's pictures of around the room here, as well as our land-based facilities where corals are grown on land. To put this together. We're going to have different partners that plug into it in different places, and lots of partners that contribute to the science along this effort as well. And so just as an example of that, Different partners plug into different places here. So here's an example of how the approach that we're going to take to putting the grazers back on the reef. These are the sea urchins and the crabs that are critical to keep the algae in check. And we're going to have a partnership between the state of Florida, FWC, the Florida Aquarium, and the University of Florida to take the work that they've been doing in the lab from a research basis and operationalize that, get that into being restoration on the ground. And so, sorry, we've got a little slide issue here. But with that, some of these reefs can be kind of iconic reefs once again. We can turn these sites around. We can really make a big difference here. This effort has the potential to create hundreds of jobs. It will be millions of dollars in community investment with billions of dollars in terms of return. It has the potential to stabilize an economy that relies on this system. And it really has the potential to be the building blocks of both restoration here in the Florida Keys, as well as restoration throughout the rest of the state of Florida and throughout the world. The state of Florida and the Florida Keys have been the leaders of coral restoration to date around the world, and we think that this effort here, starting in the Florida Keys, will continue to cement that role of being the leaders in this particular space as we take this work and the things that we've done to plan this effort and begin to export that out around other places in the world. So with that, we are excited to be able to talk to you today about this. We're going to have some folks join me up here in a moment to answer questions. On the website, which is available, everybody has access to now, and it is live. There's some more comprehensive plans on that site, so you can read about all the gory details of how this came together in pages and pages of background information and really get a sense of the thinking here. We've only been able to cover a very high level of this tonight. So I'd encourage you to do that. We want to get the word out about this effort. The reason we're doing this today and live streaming it around the world and having all of our partners share it is because the most important way to make sure this effort succeeds is to make people aware of it and get people excited about the opportunity that we have here to do something. We still have lots of big global challenges out there. We absolutely have to address those global challenges. This is not something that we can do without addressing those global challenges, but if we just wait for those global challenges, we're not going to have reefs left here. And so this is going to be our portion of making sure we still have reefs to drive the Florida Keys for the next 100 years. So with that, thank you for joining us, and we're going to ask a few folks to join us on stage here, and we'll take some questions from the audience.
And we would ask that if you have a question, raise your hand so we can get the microphone to you so the World Wide Web can hear you.
Did you want one of these? Or would you rather use this?
I'll use this. It's fine. You can keep that there.
Just stay closer to the podium when you're stepping too far away.
Yes, sir. Andy, do you want to take that question?
Certainly. What you're referring to is what we're calling stony coral tissue loss disease. This is something that first emerged off of Miami in 2014, and it has progressively marched through the reef system. It has eliminated many of the different boulder coral species that are here. We believe that it's associated with a bacteria that is waterborne. Right now, the current disease line is around marcasis, so we're still seeing some diseased corals show up on reefs that have been affected in the past over the last 4 or 5 years, but the main outbreaks are now in the marcasis at this point in time. And the only thing that I do want to mention about this is we have boulder corals in this strategy that we're putting forward, but it's something that we're phasing in, and we've started now doing pilot studies to determine when it really is safe. When can we start putting these back out on the reef where they aren't going to get this disease and they aren't going to die from the disease over time? And so we're also looking at certain genetic strains of these colonies that are resistant to the disease. So we're trying to build a population that's much more likely to survive from this disease as well as a lot of the other stressors affecting the reefs. Yes, there. In one of the dominant corals that was found on this reef is star corals, or something in the genus Orbicella, and there are certain genetic strains that have been identified that are resistant to the disease.
Yes, I was remiss as we got started here with great questions to actually get a chance to introduce our panelists. So we have Dr. Andy Bruckner with NOAA. Andy is NOAA's research coordinator at the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. We have Caitlin Lustig with TNC. We have Sarah Fangman, who is the superintendent of the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, Jessica Levy with Coral Restoration Foundation, and Allison DeSchmidt with Mote Marine Laboratory and Aquarium. So next round of questions, please.
Can you speak a little bit more, and maybe this is for you more than these guys, about the funding part? Because $97 million is a lot of money. I see a lot of partnerships, and these people are already doing this work, and it sounds like you're coordinating more, but where is real dollars coming to this? Is there going to be federal money for that? Is there actively grant raising going on for this? I mean, I have a few questions, but I'd just like to start with that because I think that's obviously going to be one of the most important things, is actually funding these efforts of these people who are on the stage who probably are already doing this work. But where is new money going to go into paying for these new projects or these ongoing projects done at a more comprehensive level and at a larger level?
Yeah, I'll start with that, and then I'm going to kick it over to Sarah in a moment here, and then any of the partners that want to join into that question. So we have historically invested a lot in restoration here, but not anywhere near as much as we need to invest here. We've made some of our biggest investments just this last year with new agreements between NOAA, with federal funds, to Mote Marine, as well as Coral Restoration Foundation. We're looking to continue those for the next 3 years. So that'll begin to put about $6 million or so into this particular effort here. But we also knew that unless we articulated a plan, that it was going to be hard to raise the capital that was necessary to do this, right? So unless you can tell somebody what you clearly need, you're not going to be able to necessarily get it. So this is telling people what we need. The next step is going to be raising the resources to do that. I'll let Sarah kind of fill in there as well.
Yeah, I would just add that clearly this is ambitious, and it is going to be, it's going to require significant investment. That said, there are already federal funds going towards restoration efforts. There are already amazing fundraising efforts that are going on by the partner organizations. I'll let them speak to that if they wish. And it's about putting it out there. What is it that we need to do? And then inviting people to help us do it. Because in this community, I hear all the time, we need to do something. How can we help? What can we do? And there is, without a doubt, recognition that these are America's iconic reefs. And we must protect them, and we must rebuild them. And so now we are saying, all right, here's what we need to do. Help us do this. And we will be seeking support from a variety of sources to make this happen. Anything you ladies would like to add?
Yeah, exactly. Just from the perspective of one of the practitioner groups doing this work, this, as Tom mentioned in his talk earlier, yes, funding is going to come from top down and be distributed, but it also gives us a rallying point, something that we can do our own fundraising around. And each, as the partners take off a piece of this work, they can then use their fundraising and their outreach initiatives to continue to gain support for these actions. And it's these combined actions, that's what's going to push us forward to really meet this lofty initiative. But if we work together, it's completely achievable. So I would just say that gives us something that we can use as a tool in our toolbox as well. And that's why one of the reasons why I think you see all the practitioners come together, because we see an investment in our efforts too.
So when does the work start in Ernst? Sorry, I apologize. So when does the work start in Ernst if all the funding isn't there yet then?
It's already started.
So you're starting some. Now, do you have permits then for all of this work through NOAA and through everything else then for on this scale and on this level? Are those permits already in place then?
You're asking about permits and if they're already in place for that. Is that right, Tim?
At this level. I know you've got them.
Right. No, we don't have permits in place for all of this yet. That said, the work is already underway in as much as this is a conversation that's been going on for close to a year now. These organizations have been working very, very hard to articulate what it is that we're needing, and I would venture to say, although I invite you guys to correct me, is that they've been ramping up towards this, recognizing we all are aiming towards this. So let us begin to direct and step up efforts that support this. And I'll let you say it because you're gonna do better than me.
We've already been actively out planting in 3 of the 7 iconic reefs, and we're going to continue on with those efforts now, today. Some of those permits are already in place, and we've been doing those already.
Yeah, and same for us. We've been acting in 6 of the 7 at this point. We talked a lot about how the history of restoration, it emerged from the Keys, but it was always driven by the practitioners. It was always bottom up. This gives the management agencies a universal vision, which makes any permitting process immensely easier to just know that we're all working towards the same thing. And so we, have our current operating permits, which are already in line with this already, and then any future operating permits just become much more streamlined with this universal vision.
I'll add to that in terms of the permits, one of the reasons we identified the phase 1A, the 10% goal focused on the acropora corals, elkhorn and staghorn, was because that's work that can start literally immediately. Any additional dollars that come into that are work that can go on immediately. They're not subject to the disease event. They don't require any extra special permitting because it's been work that we've been doing for a long time already. It's just ramping it up to a bigger scale into a more comprehensive vision. Other questions?
Hi, my name is Chris Clark with NBC6. You guys, in the face of the damage that's already been done, in the face of the global challenges that are continuing to get worse, in the face of a lot of people not knowing what's going on or federal apathy, why do you say today's about hope? Why are you so hopeful that this could actually work?
Sarah, do you want to start, and then, or Allison?
Sure. I'll start. Why am I so hopeful? Because I've seen what these folks that have been doing this have done already. I've seen the commitment. I've seen a year ago, in fact, today, 450, over 500 people were gathered here in Key Largo for the first global conference on coral restoration. And many of us in this room attended that. And perhaps could have gone into it expecting to feel a little bit of gloom and doom. And I would venture to say that everyone came out of that conference with renewed hope, because there is so much incredible work being done that is being done in many parts of the world, and people are learning things, and progress is being made, breakthroughs are being made. So my hope comes from watching what these people are doing, what these organizations are building, what they are accomplishing. That absolutely gives me hope. And pulling all of these people together in a way I don't think that has been done before. We have been working largely independently. And as I tried to ineloquently say before, we can do so much more together than we can do individually. And that is what this is about, that it is about all of us coming together behind a big mission, a bold mission, an ambitious mission, and making it happen.
And yes, we do know that the ocean is in peril. Our corals are in peril, and nobody can deny that. But we do know that because of these techniques that are being applied now, and there's a lot of science going into the restoration part of things. There's a lot of resilience-based testing that's happening on this coral that's going to be put back out there to know that it will survive today and will survive conditions in the future that we know or that we're predicting will come. So that's why resiliency-based, science-based restoration is best.
I also just wanted to add, I'm hopeful because I think people are starting to realize how much we need our reefs. And so people that in the past maybe wouldn't have been supportive of an effort like this are really, I think, going to come together behind this effort. You know, Sarah talked earlier about how important the reef is for our fisheries, for our way of life, for our shoreline protection. And I think all of that is becoming more and more apparent. And I think people will really rally behind an effort like this because of that.
Nancy Klingener with WLRN News. I have two questions. One is whether this is a response to the stony coral tissue loss disease. Would it be happening if that disease hadn't been so damaging to the reef? And the other is whether you're hoping this might help get the sanctuary some more support. You know, we've seen a lot of local resistance to the blueprint.
So Andy, if you want to start maybe with the disease context, and we can have others fill in.
So, I mean, I think the disease context is one of the things that really has given us the impetus to move forward with this. But I think there's a recognition overall about how much reefs have changed, and we really don't want to lose what is left there. We're really at a time point now where having such low coral cover on these reefs, we're starting to lose the reef framework itself. We're starting to lose some of the roles that the reef plays. And so I think that there's a bigger context to everything from the values that the reef plays from a human perspective, as well as the value it plays from the perspective of all the organisms that occur in this reef system. And I also think it's really just how far we've come with the science. If you're down to the point where reefs have just a couple % coral cover, those survivors are the things that have managed to really survive all the different stressors that are out there. They're the things that can tolerate the bleaching, the things that have tolerated the diseases. And the challenge that we face if we weren't going to do anything is how do you get those back onto the reef naturally? They're just at such low levels that they can't naturally repopulate those areas. And I think what we're seeing now is by assisting them through assisted migration, if you will, restoring the genetic diversity, I think that we have a way to bring this back. It just makes a lot more sense now to go forward in a larger context.
With regard, Nancy, to your second question relative to the context, the larger context of this, as many of you are aware, the sanctuary has been undertaking an effort that we refer to as our restoration blueprint. This is a comprehensive look at how we manage these resources. This effort is independent of that, although related in as much as both are about the future of these resources. Both of those efforts are about trying to make things better for the future relative to these resources, trying to address the threats and challenges that we're facing. And so for me, this effort is much bigger in terms of, and it's much more active in terms of getting out and inviting members of this community to be a part of this project, this mission to restore these iconic reefs.
Other questions from the room?
This is regarding the grazers. Have you ever imported on a scale like this before? And if yes, where are you going to get 1 million sea urchins?
Andy, do you want to start?
So, no, it's never been done on this scale. There was a lot of pilot experiments done about a decade ago of trying to put the urchins back out in a number of locations in the Caribbean. They have started to rebound naturally, but we just haven't really seen that in Florida. And I think we're just getting to that point where we now are able to get these urchins to spawn in enclosed systems and to raise them up, and we're raising them in more natural environmental conditions so that they're going to behave once they get onto the reef in a more natural way and actually won't be preyed upon like they were historically. So I think a lot of it is going to rely on just expanding some of the facilities where they're starting, like the Florida Aquarium, where they're starting to grow these urchins up. So we need a lot more of that. But then also, in some cases, there are places where these urchins are settling naturally and they're dying because the water gets too cold. On, for instance, near shore rubble fields, for instance, every year you see some of these urchins in some of these areas. And just by translocating those out to the environment where the water doesn't get as cold, where they're going to serve more of a role, I think that we can get to that point. But again, it's something that's really focused on phase 2, because we know that the science isn't 100% there, and we're working in that direction to get to the point where we can get 1 million sea urchins.
Hi. So, the program is bold, super bold. And yes, $100 million or $97 million is a lot of money, but like you said, Sarah, compared to other projects, it's not that much money. I guess my question is what kind of buy-in has NOAA gotten, if any yet, from administration, from Congress, in terms of really being able to support this initiative?
Sarah, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So we have briefed NOAA leadership, and they've been very supportive of this effort, recognizing the conditions that we're facing here in Florida, and put a lot of effort historically and currently into developing this and to supporting restoration in the Keys. We've also been in communication with elected officials who frankly, were asking us for something like this. A year ago, we're saying, tell us what you need. What is it that you need? And so we have provided briefings along the way as we've been developing this and keeping them informed. That's not to say, as Tom mentioned, nobody has written a single check to cover the entirety of this effort. That would be lovely, but we are definitely working with all of those entities to try to bring what resources we can into this effort. But it's going to take some work for sure.
Yeah, and I think I would just add to that yes, it's easy to say that this is a lot of money and it's going to be hard to get and it's big and it's bold, and that we were never going to get anything unless we started to articulate what we need. I like to describe this situation as one is, for a long time, people would say to me, how much work do you need to do? And my answer was, we need to do a lot. How much money do you need? We need a lot more than we have. No one is going to put their resources into something like this unless you can clearly define a vision. And so we're clearly defining that vision today. Hopefully we'll be here over the course of the next months to year to announce that different partners are coming involved and getting involved and starting to make their piece of a down payment on this particular effort as well.
Hi, my question, the thing to address is water quality. And while we're talking about the topography from the bottom up, will this have the ability to have a more unified voice so you can go to those partners upstream and be able to talk to sugar and industry and people on the mainland about the trickle-down effect of what we are receiving down in the Keys that's affecting our reef?
One of you guys in particular want to try to tackle that?
I don't mind. I'll take a start, and then maybe someone else can jump in too. So as we have noted, we feel that we cannot wait to solve those problems before we start. That said, you are spot on, Lisa. We must continue to tackle those issues. My hope is that as we invest and as we demonstrate that progress can be made, that is leverage. That is what we bring into the conversation that we haven't had before. We have not been able to say, look, we are turning this around. You've got to turn off your pollution that's coming into this system. And the fact that there will be, I believe, as a result of this, more people coming together behind something big, that they will be willing to raise their voices up louder than they have in the past towards addressing those bigger issues. That is my hope.
If I can just add one little point about the water quality issue, and I think it's really important to note that the Florida Keys has already made quite a bit of progress in addressing water quality. We have gone from having these deep injection wells with no treatment at all, to 97 or 98% of all the households and businesses are now online with sewage treatment. So within Florida Keys anyways, I think there's been a lot of local efforts to improve water quality. And there definitely needs to be more emphasis in the state of Florida as we move forward.
Can we grow those boulder corals fast enough to do what we need to do, the little pieces? Because I know they're very slow.
We can both take this. Yes, we can grow them much faster. And by using techniques of fragmentation, we can grow them 40 times at least faster than naturally in the wild. So we can grow them from a small little piece and propagate them into multiple pieces that we can then put back out on the reef that will grow to a much larger size in a very short amount of time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why we have these nurseries that we have. So we have underwater nurseries, and we have very large infrastructure at our various facilities, land-based facilities as well, to grow thousands. We're growing 40,000+ fragments of coral right now because it's going to take a huge effort and a lot of space underwater and above water to create as much as we need to do. But yes, we can do it really fast.
Yeah, ditto. But that's also why the plan that was presented was a phased approach, because we do know that there is infrastructure buildup, and we do know that there is lead time to meet those numbers. But physically, it's completely possible. You know, we just give us the go, and we'll start working on it.
I wanted to get back to the water quality issue because I do think that's important. How optimistic or can this mission be accomplished if nothing changes on the mainland? Because they've been aware of the issues on the reef and where the water goes for years and years and years, but they haven't done anything about it. So how successful do you think you can be if that water quality, the mindset up there doesn't change? How much will that impact this, and will this be able to be successful unless that changes?
So I think that, yes, we can still be very, very successful, and it comes from the fact that what we're doing when we're outplanting corals is we're not outplanting just one genetic strain. We're working at outplanting on a reef, restoring it to what it used to look like with multiple genetic strains that have different resilience to some of these different stressors, and one of those can be water quality. We're also doing assisted breeding, if you will, where we're collecting gametes from different colonies that have survived, and we're mixing those and creating new genetic strains that we're putting out there. A number of the corals that we're using are things that come from both nearshore and mid-channel reefs, which are the areas that are, affected most severely by this degraded water quality, much more so than some of the outer reef systems. And by using those corals and propagating those corals, they are going to be much more likely to tolerate the degraded water quality issues that we face right now.
And I'll just add to that, something that's important to keep in mind is that the field-based practitioners, restoration work, they're using corals that have gone through all that already. So inherently we're using more resilient corals to begin with. So that gives us a greater chance of success because we're using corals that have gone through bleaching events, water quality events, all of these disease events even. So we're starting with a hardy stock already.
Other questions?
How do you get this message to the rest of the country that isn't on the water? I think that when you look at the challenge, everybody here, we live very close to the reefs. When you get north of Florida, they don't know really, that nobody anywhere off the coast knows really what a reef is unless they're a diver or they come here as a fisherman. How do you get this message out bigger? Because like not having enough density on the reef for them to propagate, we need density of people caring.
Allison, do you want to maybe start with that and how we get the message out?
Well, first of all, there is a big effort underway by many, many partners to try to rebrand our reef, if you will, so that we can encourage others to understand that maybe don't live here why our reef is so important and how it is a national treasure that is vanishing in front of our eyes. And if we lose it, it's gone, and why that should matter to somebody in Kansas. So there is a big effort underway from multiple partners to try to help be more consistent in all of our messaging and branding above and beyond. So I think this plays a part into that. So what we're doing here will certainly play a part into that. And then in our regular communications and PR, we need to sort of up the ante a little bit. Now we have something that we can put a charge behind and sort of circle the wagons and try to make sure that we're all marching to the same beat of the drum.
If I could just add one more piece to this. As part of our coral disease response effort, we're undertaking what we call a coral rescue mission, where we've gone ahead of the disease line and we've been collecting corals and we're putting those into land-based facilities. We're basically holding them there until the disease goes away, and at the same time we're starting to work on propagating some of those corals. Well, those corals are going all across the United States to AZA facilities, so public aquaria. So there's some that are now in Columbus. There's some that are in New Jersey. They're going to a number of these facilities, and so there's a portion of those that they'll be just holding in tanks and doing research on them, but they're also setting up public displays. And I think that that's really going to help get the message out that we've taken these corals out. They're going to see these. There's some messaging associated with those displays about why we've done this and, you know, what has happened to the reefs here and what are we trying to do. I think that that's going to be a big step in outreach about the effort in the Florida Keys.
And I think you're right in saying that a lot of people don't know about the issues here, but I also think that when people do learn about them, they really care. People are really drawn to reefs and the organisms that live on them. So recently in the Nature Conservancy magazine, we had an article about the work that we do in the dry tortugas, and I had people reach out on Facebook that I didn't know from all over the country, and they were really inspired by the work that we do there. So I think if we can get the message out, we really can get people behind this.
One of the reasons we named this effort what we did and we picked the sites we did was because these sites were iconic to a lot of people throughout the years, right? Many of the sites are sites that you know their name. You could be a random diver from Kansas or Nebraska, and if you came to the Florida Keys 20 years ago to snorkel or dive, there's a decent chance you were on one of these sites and you're going to remember that site. They were iconic historically. They became iconic again in terms of being the poster child of decline. We can make them iconic again. And we also have sites here. You know, we tried when we picked the sites to really think about that as one of the factors here. Some of the sites off of Key West are the sites that hundreds of thousands of cruise ship passengers see every single year when they go snorkeling. We didn't shy away from those sites because we want some sites that people can connect with, while other sites are more remote. Sites like Newfound Harbor are right adjacent to Sea Camp, places where tens of thousands of kids for the first time ever from all around the country saw coral for the first time when they snorkeled or dove there. So that's one of the ways we want to use this to connect as well.
Carly, I'll follow up with a possibly controversial answer that's going to get me in trouble. I think one of the biggest things that we have to do locally is admit that there's a problem. Admit that there's a problem. For example, it's really tough in industries that rely on tourism to say that the reefs are not that great. For example, after Irma, there was a lot of effort in the dive community saying the reefs are fine, come on down. But that's not the case. So we have to be okay with saying that our reefs aren't what they were, that there is a lot of loss. We've done a fantastic job of that in this room, but that message has to be okay to be put out there. Because once you admit that there's a problem, there's a solution in place to start addressing that problem.
We've got time for maybe just two more questions.
I have two questions, but one of them is very simple. The first one, I'll give you the simple one. You mentioned a website. What is the website address to go to for the Mission Iconic Reefs?
So we've got some material in the room here. I believe it's fisheries.noaa.gov/iconic-reefs. I believe is correct. but we've got it around the room here and on some of the material as well.
Okay, maybe that wasn't the easy question. I don't know. Thank you. Yeah, my next question is, you mentioned admitting the problem is a big part of it, and then sometimes people are afraid to do that because it might decrease tourism. In regards to the diving community, I am here representing Patty. It's actually a huge burst of tourism because the global diving community wants to actually go places where they can help. They don't necessarily just want to come here to see beautiful reefs. So if you tell the diving community that there is a problem, it might actually have, and I know you guys have been seeing this, it might have a bit of the reverse effect, increasing tourism. So in regards to Mission Iconic Reefs, what role can the scuba diving community in Florida as well as worldwide, what role can they play in this 10 and 20 year long project?
Jess, you want to take that?
Yeah. Okay. Where to start? The diving community can do a lot. First of all these organizations, all these efforts happen on scuba. So being able to be present and be involved and volunteer and give their time. And I just want to echo what you said. In our volunteer program, 90% of the divers that we have come through are divers that are tired of just looking and swimming, and they actually want to do something. So that's huge. So there's the manpower side of things, the dive power side of things. There's also encouraging best practices within the diving industry, so limiting their impacts on the reef, limiting anchors, reef safe sunscreens, all of these things, and also getting behind projects like this. It's, the dive as an industry, it's really difficult to fund projects outside of just traditional diving. So showing support for something like this, where you're actively trying to enhance dive sites for visitors to come and look at, would be huge. I'm sure there's lots of stuff.
So one more question, and then we're going to have to wrap it up.
Hi, this is Lisa. I sit on the Sanctuary Advisory Council, and we did come up with the Clean Seas Florida Keys, which was a huge effort to clean up the reefs. And we've been doing reef cleanups in the Keys since Earth Day and Ocean Day. It didn't happen just after Irma, and it didn't happen at this time. It's just becoming more aware, and Patty with the Project Aware has been very successful with that. So I think continuing that message of hope and building on that to do voluntourism and get more people down in the Keys, we can keep making things happen.
Well, I'll just reiterate that it is our intention to have community involvement be a fundamental part of this effort. So it is not intended for this to just be the work of the practitioners, as dedicated and as heroic as they are. It is also intended to bring in partners, community members, divers to help us, because frankly, we're going to need it to be able to get this done. We're going to need the community. We're going to need divers to volunteer and support this effort. So that is absolutely a part of the design.
So thank you all for joining us today. We have an opportunity now. We will all be around here, and all of our great partners are going to be around here as well for the next half an hour to do one-on-one interviews, have one-on-one discussions with you. We do have the opportunity this afternoon for members of the media to join us for a snorkeling trip on the water to go visit one of the coral nursery sites as well as a coral restoration site. So we have a few spaces left in the boat for members of the media. So if you're interested in that, please see Gina Parsons after this. That's a 1 o'clock departure from the Rainbow Reef Dive Center on Ocean Drive. And so please make sure you're at that address at 1 o'clock for ready for departure. If you need to rent snorkeling gear or anything like that, please be there early and arrange for that with the company. I'll say that for media that's joined us both here as well as media that's joined us other places, we're happy to follow up as much as we can on this. We have lots of material on the website as well, including a full media kit with pictures and video and things like that for you to further amplify this story as well. So, and we've got our partners around the room here with tables set up to talk to you about what they do. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you to the panel for this work, and please help us get the word out.
Hey, Tom, I just wanted to say one thing, too. I've been working on restoration here for 10 years, and I've watched it sort of grow and blossom. And I just want to thank you guys for giving us the opportunity to think about this in this way, because this is really exciting. And I think this is a great opportunity for us all to work together in a way that we have been in the past, but really kind of solidify that partnership. So thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, no, but it's more that I use it to just kind of set the tone, right? I mean, we have to start somewhere. And and they're different. The range in size and range in habitat are all iconic in one way or another, historically. So it works well. We're starting here.
Good morning, everybody. We'll be starting in a few minutes. If you'll take your seat, please. I'm Gina Parsons, the Communications and Outreach Manager for Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. As you know from the schedule, we will have a presentation. The lights will go down at that point, and then we will take questions and have our partners on stage to help answer those. So we will be starting in about 2 minutes.